what happened along with the adoption of BT cotton is that there were many shifts that had happened in cotton cultivation per se. One, lot of varietal tracks where farmers used their own seeds from their crops shifted to hybrid BT cotton seed. Two, a lot of area went under irrigated cotton where it used to be rain-fed cotton. And concomitantly, there were good years, good monsoon years, and so on.
You are suggesting that it was a combination of circumstances that resulted in the increase in cotton output and not just
BT technology. There
alone.
are studies. There are studies, in fact, that have tried to isolate what was the contribution of BT technology alone to the changes that one saw in the past decade in the cotton scenario. And one IFPRI study, IFPRI study, shows that just about
International
Food Policy Research Institute, it shows that just about 19% of the yield increases can be attributed to BT technology, whereas 81%, 81%,
one-fifth, almost
but
one-fifth.
81% came from factors that we always knew would contribute to yield increases: irrigation, good seed sources, which is, you know, from variety to hybrid and so on. More importantly, the IFPRI study that I'm citing has not analyzed the role of irrigation when it analyzed 19%. Okay. But let me tell you something. I have a graph here which is showing that the greatest yield increases in Indian cotton, most impressive, have happened in years before BT cotton took over. 70% nearly was the yield increase 6 years before BT cotton started expanding. After BT cotton started expanding, yields actually started declining. And this is a story not told by the government, not said in the parliament, not said outside.
देखिए भरत जी, आप तो किसान को तो आप धोखा नहीं दे पाएंगे, ठीक है। आप मान लीजिए आप एक बीज का इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, अगर आपका उत्पादन नहीं बढ़ेंगे, अगर उत्पादकता नहीं बढ़ेगा, तो आप बार-बार क्यों इस्तेमाल करेंगे? मगर जो those who are supporting the use of BT cotton seeds have said farmers have preferred it, farmers are adopting it because they think it is good for them. Now, I agree what she said, that it may have contributed due to better irrigation, better other agricultural practices, but according to the study she's citing, the IFPRI study, close to a fifth, 19% of the increase in production has also been on account of the use of BT cotton seeds. So why are you opposed to it?
परंजय जी, मैं हाल ही में गुजरात के ऐसे कुछ गांवों में गया था जहां पर कि बीटी कॉटन को बहुत बड़े पैमाने पर अपनाया गया था। वहां के अगर अर्ली ईयर्स में देखें तो जिसे कहते हैं ना स्वेयरिंग बाय बीटी कॉटन, कि भाई बीटी कॉटन हमारे लिए बहुत अच्छा है, वो गुजरात का ऐसा गांव था। लेकिन वही लोग कह रहे हैं कि पहले कुछ सालों में हमें मिला अच्छा नतीजा, उस समय वेदर भी फेवरेबल था, और अभी हाल के समय में इतना बुरा उसका असर रहा कि अब हम सभी ने छोड़ दी है। तो मुझे लगता है कि इसको एक वो ना देखकर उसको आपको थोड़ा गहराई में जानना पड़ेगा। आप जहाँ पर बीटी कॉटन उगाया गया है, आप आंध्र प्रदेश में उसके अध्ययन देख सकते हैं, मध्य प्रदेश में देख सकते हैं, और बिल्कुल हाल के समय में गुजरात में देख सकते हैं कि शुरू में ज़रूर कुछ अट्रैक्शन होता है, कुछ समय अच्छा भी होता है, और उसके बाद ना केवल उसमें प्रॉब्लम्स आती हैं, लेकिन उसके साथ जमीन पर जो असर, नहीं मैं बात
ठीक है, आप पूरा
जमीन पर जो असर होता है उसके बाद जो फर्टिलिटी लैंड की कम होती है वो भी एक समस्या है।
तो आपका कहना है अगर 3-4 साल
मैं इस बात को जरा सा पूरा कर लूं। दूसरी बात यह है कि आपने देश में एक ऐसी स्थिति पैदा होने दी है जिसमें कि एक बहुराष्ट्रीय कंपनी के हाथ में सारा बीज आ गया है कॉटन का, मतलब बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा आ गया है। अब वो उस बीज को जो जितना भी बीज है, चाहे कम उत्पादकता वाला या ज़्यादा उत्पादकता वाला बीज, वो बीटी ट्रेड के बाहर रखता ही नहीं है उसको, वो उसी बीज को रिलीज करता है, हाई उत्पादकता वाले बीज को, जिसमें वो बीटी ट्रेड जोड़ के बेचता है। अगर मान लीजिए कि देश में कंपटीशन होता और बहुत सी ऐसी कंपनीज होती जो कि उसी हाइब्रिड बीज को या उसी हाई यील्डिंग बीज को वो उस तरह भी देते और बिना बीटी ट्रेड के भी देते, तो मुझे लगता है कि बिना बीटी टेक्नोलॉजी के, बिना ये जीएम क्रॉप की टेक्नोलॉजी के भी आपको अच्छी उत्पादकता वाली बीज मिल जाती है।
No, I think there is one thing to be said about adoption. Why have farmers adopted it?
Correct.
Adoption
and
cannot
if I can just have a brief intervention. Even if for a few years the farmers have benefited, what Bharat is arguing that it's not worth it, because you've resulted in the quality of your soil deteriorating, nutrients of your soil getting depleted.
And no sustainable
No, that is certainly
no
a point
benefit.
well worth noting, because agriculture is not about a 5-year stint or a 10-year stint of pulling as much as you can out of your resources and staying put. That's not possible. It has to continue, because we all need our food from agriculture.
All right.
But I do want to point out that adoption is not an indicator of the success or desirability of a technology. Indian farmers have adopted millions of gallons of chemical pesticides. Will you today say that pesticides have been good for us?
1 minute. Let me make another point to you. And yeah, you made your point, and you're saying it's correct. So even if Indian farmers have followed faulty practices and today are paying a price for it, there's no reason why they should continue on that path.
Exactly.
Okay. The point you were making about Monsanto. I'm not holding any brief for Monsanto. Monsanto is one of the biggest companies of its kind in the world, but there are many of their initial products, their patents on it, the intellectual property rights they hold, they're going to be expiring, and they start expiring, in fact, from 2014 onwards. So are we really seeing a big monster where there's none?
In fact, in India and countries like India, Monsanto does not hold legal rights.
Did they operate through Indian partners?
No, not just that.
Okay.
Our law does not allow for patents on, life forms, for instance. So their control is not coming from a law that exists there on intellectual property rights, but an unwritten business etiquette that respects their intellectual property rights elsewhere also, which is a very funny thing, which is a very ironical thing. Today, Indian public sector...
I'm not able to understand you.
Indian public sector, for instance, has withdrawn a particular BT cotton that it has released through the ICAR outfits, essentially because it got contaminated with Monsanto's gene. Monsanto cannot enforce its patent or its IPR over its gene in India, but still the public sector thought that it is not a done thing to sell something that has Monsanto's gene to market it in the country. So they are respecting a unwritten business etiquette, like I said, which is happening all over the world. More importantly, laws are only one part of how the market is controlled. Monsanto controls the market through technology, so that farmers have to go back again and again for buying the seed from the same entity. Monsanto also controls markets through simple market maneuvers of wiping out competition from the market. Acquisitions, mergers, front avatars and other companies and so on.
All right.
So there are many weapons in the hands of big corporations like
देखिए
Monsanto.
भरत जी, आपके पास हम वापस आएंगे, एक आखिरी विराम लेने का समय आए हैं, because it's many of these issues are mired in litigation, or there are trade disputes, international trade disputes taking place, and
भ्रष्टाचार के allegations भी हैं.
हाँ जी, तो मैं कहना, I want you to talk a little bit about, why you said that it's bad for BT cotton as well. What about foods? Let's take the BT brinjal case. Let's look ahead. Let's look ahead at the regulatory mechanisms that we have. Are they adequate? Are they not adequate? Okay, let's look at some of these issues. I'll get back to both of you. We are looking at genetically modified crops and foods, and we're looking at the various controversies surrounding their use across the world and also in India. We'll be back with you in the fourth and the last segment of this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back to the fourth and the final segment of this discussion on genetically modified crops and foods. With me here in the studio, Kavitha Kuruganti of the Alliance for Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture, and author and journalist Bharat Dogra. Kavitha ji, you were in the movement which ensured that BT cotton didn't come to India. But this is just a moratorium. Monsanto, Mahiko, they are very keen, not only on BT brinjal, they want BT papaya, BT tomato, BT 1001
There's something
things.
like 72 different plants in the pipeline.
Correct. So what is the procedures by which these are put together? We have a committee, we have the, there's been a lot of controversy about the way these committees have been working. Kindly explain the position as it exists today.
There are 2-3 main issues with what's wrong with the regulatory regime today. One is the fact that the mandate of assessing biosafety thoroughly, independently, rigorously, that too for chronic impacts, like we pointed out earlier, this is an irreversible living technology. If you go wrong, then there's no way you can correct your path, unlike other technologies that preceded genetic engineering. So the kind of assessment that has to take place before a GE crop is allowed to be commercialized is an issue, and this has been recognized in the BT brinjal debate also.
Yes, but Mr. Jairam Ramesh acceded to your viewpoint, and BT brinjal has not been introduced.
Yes, and
so in that sense,
the
government was convinced by your arguments.
Yes, and we appreciate what the government did at that point of time. It responded both to scientists and the public. And we are saying that this is something that has to apply to all GM crops in the pipeline, that you actually assess comprehensively all the impacts independently. A second point is that regulation should be devoid of any conflict of interest. That's not been the case so far. People who have a stake in GM crop development are sitting and taking decisions.
You are saying that interested people, or there have been conflicts of interest in some key members of these committees which are set up to approve.
As well as entire departments, not just key members in some regulatory
bodies. But you can argue this is true for many other government departments. They are amenable to influence, they are amenable to be...
No, but let's talk about improving in all those spheres. Just because it's happening somewhere, it doesn't mean that it's acceptable here. Third element relates to the fact that without even assessing whether there are alternatives, why go in for GM at all? When there is so much controversy around the world, when a majority of nations around the world are saying a clear no to the technology, India has no reason to walk in and say yes to this technology for every problem that GM is being shown as a solution to. If we can show that there are other good, affordable, farmer-controlled solutions,
All right.
why should we opt for GM?
अच्छा,
Yeah?
भरत जी अभी 31 देश में ऐसे रेगुलेटरी अप्रूवल मिल गया इनको, 60 रेगुलेटरी अप्रूवल मिला, फूड, फीड यूज और 1000 से ज़्यादा आपका वो अभी भी अप्रूवल फॉर 196 इवेंट्स इज An event is a specific genetic modification in a specific species, whether it be, of course, USA is topping the list, but there's Japan, Canada, Mexico, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, New Zealand, European Union, Taiwan, and as we've already discussed, maize is really has maximum number of events associated with it. But the short point is, in a country like the US, 90% of the soybean, the cotton, the corn, and even sugar beet are genetically modified varieties. If it's happening in the US, why are we being so worried? Are we being unnecessarily worried?
सबसे पहले तो परांजय जी मैं इस ओर आपका ध्यान दिलाना चाहूँगा, क्योंकि क्लेम्स और काउंटर क्लेम तो चलता रहा इस पूरे डिबेट में, किसी ने कुछ कहा, किसी ने कुछ कहा, लेकिन कुछ ऐसी रिपोर्ट्स आई हैं जिसमें बहुत से वैज्ञानिकों ने इकट्ठा होकर अब तक का जितना भी एविडेंस था उस एविडेंस को पूल किया, जिसमें अमेरिका को भी देखा गया है, क्योंकि अमेरिका में से जैसे आपने कहा कि सबसे ज़्यादा प्रसार हुआ है, उसमें एक इंडिपेंडेंट साइंस पैनल की रिपोर्ट है, एक रिपोर्ट है यूनियन ऑफ कंसर्न साइंटिस्ट,
आपने अभी
बताया मैंने, और एक फ्रेंड्स ऑफ द अर्थ यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स, जिसने सिर्फ यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स का देखा है वो फ्रेंड्स ऑफ द अर्थ की रिपोर्ट है। एक बात जो बिल्कुल कॉमन है कि उत्पादकता नहीं बढ़ी है। ये मतलब ये है ना, जैसे कि आपने कुछ अध्ययनों का हवाला दिया कि उत्पादकता बढ़ रहा है।
No, it's a convenience factor, and US Department of Agriculture's own studies are showing that वहाँ पे जो बड़े land holdings होते हैं किसानों के,
and they have huge farms over there.
Yeah, and the herbicide tolerance as a trait, for instance, where you don't have manual, wage workers to de-weed your lands.
Everything is mechanized.
Yeah, everything is mechanized. So a technology like this might come in handy for them, but that does not mean that it is desirable or that we should import it here, because our socio-economic growing conditions are completely different because the US has adopted it.
So you are saying that just because US has adopted that there's no reason why the rest of the world should.
Absolutely not.
लेकिन मैं ये इसके आगे जाकर ये भी कहना चाहता हूँ कि अब तक जो एविडेंस उपलब्ध है वो ये भी नहीं कहता है कि अमेरिका के लिए ये यूजफुल रहा है। अमेरिका के जो साधारण किसान हैं एज अपोज टू बिग कंपनीज, वो भी इससे बहुत परेशान हुए हैं। उनके खिलाफ उसको फ्रैंकनस्टीन सीड्स कहा गया है, फ्रैंकन सीड्स कहा गया है वहाँ पर इसको, और वहाँ पे उन किसानों के ऊपर तमाम किस्म के मुकदमों में फंसाया है उनको इन बड़ी कंपनियों ने। और ये मैं बहुत जरूर इस और ध्यान दिलाना चाहता हूँ कि जो कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव स्टडीज है उसको देखा जाए। उसकी जो बीच बीच में थोड़ा बहुत एक तरह का वन साइडेड करके दे दिया जाता है, उस पर ध्यान न दिया जाए। अब जैसे जो सबसे एक विस्तार से किया था इंडिपेंडेंट साइंस पैनल ने, उनका कंक्लूजन है दैट वी शुड एंटायरली रिजेक्ट जीएम क्रॉप्स। तो कोई आधार होगा जिसके आधार पर इतने साइंटिस्ट कह रहे हैं। और जहां तक रेगुलेशन का सवाल है तो मुझे कहना है कि ये सबसे जो एक पहले नंबर का सुधार चाहिए कि ये जो रिसर्च है उसको इंडिपेंडेंट बनाइए और उसको बहुराष्ट्रीय कंपनियों के असर से मुक्त कीजिए।
I want to add to that that it's time that all field trials are stopped in India. This is the issue on which the Supreme Court is hearing a case, and the next hearing is scheduled on whether India should continue with open air field trials, and if yes, under what conditions. And field trials pose the greatest risk because we're really talking about unassessed, unappraised, unknown organisms being let out into the environment in the name of field trials. That's the current debate in India.
Many people argue that people like you are scaremongering. That if indeed it has worked in some parts of the world, we can adopt it after taking into account adequate precautions.
It has not worked in any part of the world.
Unless the need is established, there's absolutely no reason why we should. Scaremongering is indulged by the other side, which says that we are, facing starvation, we'll have a huge food security crisis.
आज भारत का जो पार्लियामेंट ऑफ इंडिया है, जो संसद है, हम अभी बातचीत हो रहे कि खाद्य सुरक्षा के लिए एक नया कानून चाहिए। आप कह रहे हैं कि ये जीएम क्रॉप्स कैन नॉट मीट इंडियाज फूड सिक्योरिटी रिक्वायरमेंट्स।
खाद्य सुरक्षा इससे बहुत क्षतिग्रस्त हो जाएगी, क्योंकि देखिए हमारे देश में जहाँ की बहुसंख्यक किसान हैं, आप एक इतनी रिस्क वाली और इतनी अनसर्टन किस्म की टेक्नोलॉजी दे रहे हैं जिसमें कि आपको बाद में पता चलेगा कि इसका तो कोई बिक्री नहीं हो रहा है, क्योंकि वो उसके जब नुकसान उसके सामने आएंगे तो आप समझ सकते हैं कि अमेरिका में तो 2% आबादी है, 1% आबादी किसान का है, यहाँ पर क्या होगा।
फिर आप देखिए, is not a supply side issue.
What is it?
We have overflowing godowns.
I know we have too much wheat and rice in the godowns of food corporation.
And the hungriest people are people who are taking part in the food production process in rural India. If we take care of agricultural livelihoods, starting from the production end to the markets, that is when you can make sure that the food produced will also be accessed by the poorest in this country. We can't go on producing more in the name of such Malthusian arguments saying that it's a supply side problem, because at the end of the day you will have your rotting foods
so it's a question of entitlements, it's a question of distribution,
it's a question of access.
So it's not a question of production
for sure,
or storage.
For sure.
So, what then if GM foods and GM crops are not the solution to India's food security problems? You would say then you need a whole lot of other things, none of which can happen overnight, whether it be improved irrigation, whether it be land reforms, whether it be, better transportation arrangement, cold chains, etc., etc.
No, nothing can happen overnight, and you know, even green revolution was not brought about overnight. There was a political will and a policy decision behind it. Today, India has to decide that agriculture is not about production and yields. It's about livelihoods. It's about keeping rural India alive and you know, thriving. And for that to happen, all these things have to happen. In addition to that, the government has to decide that ecological farming has to be promoted.
All right, भरत जी, ये हमारे देश के जो किसान हैं, इन लोग तो बेवकूफ नहीं हैं, ठीक है? अतीत में ऐसे कुछ गलत चीज का इस्तेमाल किया, पेस्टिसाइड्स, हर्बिसाइड्स, but you think the Indian farmer is adequately informed, adequately empowered to realize the issues, the problems as far as using genetically modified organisms?
मेरे को लगता है कि इसका जो बिल्कुल निष्पक्ष ढंग से इसका दुनिया में अभी तक का जितना भी जानकारी उपलब्ध है वो किसानों के बीच लेके जाना, उसको सही ढंग से उनके सामने रखना बहुत ज़रूरी है। और उसका निष्कर्ष आप सब देख लेंगे कि यही निकलेगा कि ये जो टेक्नोलॉजी है ये किसानों की भलाई के लिए नहीं है, लेकिन उसके बावजूद जो आपने कहा कि ये क्यों फैलाई जा रही है, क्योंकि ये बहुराष्ट्रीय कंपनियों का, कुछ बहुराष्ट्रीय कंपनियों का पूरी कृषि और खाद्य व्यवस्था पर अपना नियंत्रण बढ़ाने के लिए बहुत उपयोगी है।
Okay, last word from you. How does one, sort of generate greater awareness? How does one make people aware of the issues at stake? I mean, because after all, we are dealing with large corporations. They have a lot of money, a lot of influence. We've already discussed that.
In other countries, public funds have been spent on deliberative democratic processes around issues like this. We do need an informed debate. Incidentally, wherever there's been an informed debate on the subject, citizens have rejected this technology.
Okay.
We need an informed debate.
Thank you so much, Kavitha ji, for coming here to the studio. Bharat ji, thank you so much for coming here. Well, at the end of the day, time alone will tell how informed that debate will be. But our panelists are clear that the debate on the use of genetically modified crops and foods needs to be transparent. It needs to be conducted in a manner without the influence, without the economic and political influence of giant multinational corporations like Monsanto. And at the end of the day, the farmer on the field knows what is good for her and good for him, and she and her voice needs to be heard in this entire discourse. Thank you so much for being with us on this program.